How's it going, guys? I'm Josh, and today I'm going to be talking about 8 of the most bizarre photography styles you probably did not know existed. Now, this video stemmed from this morning I fell into the deepest Wikipedia deep dive I have ever fallen into. We're talking the type where you open up 20 articles from the first one you read, and then you start reading the source articles, and it's just this endless cycle. I have learned so much about some very strange things, and some of them are haunting and creepy, some of them are bizarre, but I'll tell you the one common thread is that they're all incredibly genius and very smart. So I'm super excited to share them with you. But before we jump in, today's video is brought to you by Squarespace. Whether you want to build a portfolio page, print shop, or niche website devoted toward your budding pigeon aerial photography business, because drones are so 2000 late, Squarespace has you covered. Squarespace makes it incredibly easy to build a sleek, beautiful website. I've been using them for many years now and couldn't be happier. So whether you're a professional photographer or want to trick people into thinking you're one, head to squarespace.com for your free trial now. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/JoshKatz to save 10% off your first purchase on a website or domain. Now let's get this video started. Number one, let's talk about spirit photography. So in the 1860s, a psychic named William Mumler invented this process totally by accident involving double exposure so that it could actually take 2 photos on the same roll of film. So he decided to go into the psychic photography business and actually conjure up people's dead relatives into the photo with their live ones, and it makes for really, really creepy portraits. They're beautiful though, and it's always one live person sitting with this kind of spiritual photo of their dead relative, usually hand on the shoulder. They're eerie but beautiful images. Now, of course, these were later revealed to be a con, but people really believed these at the time, especially because you gotta think about historical context here. This is the 1860s during the Civil War, so there's tons of death. Families are in mourning, and this is a great way for families to grieve their dead relatives. So this business blew up. Now, this phenomenon even got so big that Mary Todd Lincoln, the widow of Abraham Lincoln, actually did this with William Mumler, and the photo is absolutely iconic. Now, a later derivative of spirit photography is thoughtography, and this is the idea that psychics could burn images from their mind onto the film. Now, what's really fun about thoughtography and spirit photography is that people really were put up in a tizzy by these phenomenons, and there was this constant battle of some people trying to prove that they're true and honest methods and other people trying to debunk them. So all of these thoughttographers and spirit photographers were revealed to be frauds eventually, and they were all just using different camera tricks and flawed film and special developing tricks. And what's funny about this is these tricks are actually all commonplace to us now. So they were doing things like chemical screening in the developing process, as well as double exposures and zooming in while you take a photo to give it this like nice ghostly effect. And at the time, in the 1800s, these were crazy phenomenons. It made for really creepy looking images that no one could understand. Yet if you ask a kid who's taken a year or two of photography in middle school, he'd be like, yeah, I think this is how they took that photo. Number 2, this is my favorite one probably, is hidden mother photography. Now, in the mid-1800s, taking a photo was a lengthy process. To get your subject to be sharp, they needed to stay still for up to 30 seconds. And with little kids, this is really problematic. So as a result, to solve this problem, rather than just having the mothers in the photo holding their kids still, the mothers would actually hide themselves either behind these cloaks, they'd be just out of frame, they'd be poking out from behind a chair, or they'd even be disguised as a chair to hold their child still in the photo. And these photos are absolutely hysterical. Now, one person's theory as to why they did these rather than just having the mother holding the baby in the shot is because it makes for a more intimate experience where it's just about the kid rather than about the bond between the mother and the child. If you'd like to learn more about this, Laura Larson actually wrote a book about it and collected tons of images from all over the world about this phenomenon, and the images are absolutely hysterical, and this would make for the best coffee table book ever. So I'll put links to all of the Wikipedias as well as these articles and coffee table books that I'll be mentioning. Number 3, Brady stand portraits, and this is equally as hysterical as number 2. So it turns out it's not just little kids who have trouble staying still, it's also grown adults, and with that comes the Brady stand. This was a device invented to keep adults still for these portraits, and it is a cast iron kind of table-esque thing that also has sometimes armrests and neck rests, and it basically looks horrifying. It looks like a torture device, yet sometimes I feel like I could use it for this video for my hands because I move them too much. Bring back the Brady stand, but not for torturing, unless you're into that. Number 4, I want to talk about post-mortem photography. Now, this is a fascinating subject, but it is very solemn, so I'm not going to be making any jokes, of course. Death is a serious matter, and it's very intimate. So Post-mortem photography actually stemmed from post-mortem paintings, and this used to be a big thing in Europe and the US, mostly children as well as adults, just as a way to remember them. And when photography came out, it was naturally a cheaper alternative. Now, bear in mind, 17th, 18th century US and Europe, death was a lot more rampant than it is today, and there were all these diseases, and it was just a more common thing. People were dealing with this, and a great way to remember a child who passes, which is a terrible, terrible thing, is a photo. So this is a huge thing, and oftentimes they would have these children sat up as if they were alive still, and they'd sometimes even open up their eyes. The photos are a little bit creepy, but sometimes they're very beautiful. Sometimes they'd have them lying in their bed very gracefully. There's a whole wide range of different post-mortem photographs. Yet I was thinking, how antiquated is this concept? So the latest series I could find is a series of photographs in the 1960s in Harlem, and there's a book called Harlem Book of the Dead if you're interested. Now, I then started to wonder, is there anything even more recent? And that's how I stumbled across the organization Now I Lay Before I Sleep. And what they do is it connect photographers with parents who've dealt with the death of a baby in birth or just very early on in life. And photographers, for free, come and photograph portraits of the children with their parents. And it's a very beautiful thing. It helps the parents actually grieve. I can't imagine how tragic it is to lose a child. Unbelievable. But it's a beautiful thing. They actually, interestingly enough, take the photos in black and white because it's more about remembrance. And just think about how photography helps people remember and deal with loss. So I think it's a great thing that they're doing. I know that was a lot, so let's just take a moment to enjoy this photo I took of the sunrise over the Tuscan countryside, because we need to just chill for a second. Moving on, number 5, this is not as sad as it's gonna sound, I promise. Funeral selfies. So a journalist a few years back was looking around on Twitter, looked up the hashtag funeral and selfie together, and discovered there are all these mostly middle school age kids who are posting selfies of themselves before, after, or during relatives and loved ones' funerals. And they're usually smiling and looking really happy, and it's a really strange thing. So they made a whole Tumblr about it, it blew up. Now a whole lot of people got very upset about this, saying it's just this extremely inappropriate expression of emotions, you shouldn't be happy during such sad times. Now I was reading a piece by the founder of the blog, and here's a quote they said. When a teen tweets out a funeral selfie, their friends don't castigate them. They understand that their friend, in their own way, is expressing an emotion they may not have words for. It's a visual language that older people, even those like me in their 30s, simply do not speak. This makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's kids wanting to share but not knowing how to share their sadness, so they just smile. It's bizarre. It's definitely bizarre. But yeah, beautiful Tumblr. Definitely scroll through it and let me know in the comments if you're upset by it, if you think it's just kids being kids, or if you think older generations would have done the same thing if they had our technology now. I'd be curious to know. Moving on to number 6, this is a really exciting one. FBI's most wanted list. So I was looking at those old wanted posters that were so much fun, Wanted Dead or Alive, you know, the classics, and I'm thinking, what is the modern day equivalent? Which led me to the FBI's most wanted list. Now, this is all online now, and there are 2 very interesting ones. So there's the most wanted list, and it's just a bunch of mugshots of people looking horrifying, and that's, you know, kind of cool to look at. Some pretty intense portraits, if you will, of these people, and you always look at them and you're like, I could see why this person committed this crime. They look like they had it in them. Now, what I think is even more interesting than this is their bank robbers list. So they have a whole page devoted toward bank robbers who haven't been caught. And it shows them via surveillance camera robbing the bank, and oftentimes they're holding a gun, they're looking really angry, they're threatening people. It's people in this moment that is probably the most defining moment of their lives, or maybe one of the many if they're robbing multiple banks. But it's a pretty intense thing to be robbing a bank, holding people at gunpoint, and it just captures the state of tension, even though they're not high quality images that are really just riveting to look at. So definitely check that out, and if you actually know any of these people, probably report them to the FBI. And we've now solved a crime together. So good work on that, guys. And number 7, we have pigeon photography. And this is basically drone photography, but 100 years earlier. So in 1907, there was a man who used to deliver medicine via pigeon post, which is courier service via pigeon. And he decided to try installing a camera on his pigeons. And he just used a timer delay, set up the camera and let the birds rip. And this ended up being very successful. They got some very beautiful aerial shots, and they're super cool because you can see the bird's wings on both ends of the photo often. And this method became so popular that it was actually adapted during World War I. It was used, World War II, the CIA used it in the 70s. So very common spy method, and actually ISIS still uses pigeons to deliver messages, which is pretty interesting. I highly recommend you look at the Wikipedia page for pigeon photography. It's surprisingly thorough and built out. So more recently, there's been the invention of the critter cam, which is when they install cameras onto all kinds of different animals to learn about their lives. Very National Geographic-esque stuff. They did it for March of the Penguins. And then they've also attached high quality video cameras onto falcons, I believe, for really smooth, beautiful aerial videography more recently. So very cool stuff to learn here. And I love these photos so much. Now our final one, and this is so fascinating, whole culture behind this. Number 8, in-game photography, or also known as screenshot art. So people go and play video games and try and take beautiful photos within the game. Now the first example of this is in the game Second Life, which is a virtual reality world. Someone actually made a gallery in the game called 13 Most Beautiful Avatars. And it's actually like an art gallery you'd walk into in real life, but it was in the game, and it had these canvases you could look at. And since then, it's become this whole culture. And what's fascinating about this is it actually mimics our real world photography experience very similarly. So you could actually play your game and just try and do the objective it presents to you, or some people go into these video games and instead just look around. Instead of using a camera as we do in real life to take photos, they just, navigate the character to create these beautiful compositions. There's still composition, they're still working with lines and symmetry and lighting and all these things to make beautiful shots. And people take this very seriously. Leonard Singh is considered a professional in-game photographer, and he's actually done multiple series. So one he made was called Back Seats in Games, in which he did a series of photos taken from the back seat of cars looking forward, so you see who's driving them, and it looks like a beautiful road trip series. Actually, it's very cool stuff, and he has a whole process. He uses professional screen capturing software, and then he actually goes and edits the photos. So he'll add grain, bump up the contrast, all kinds of interesting stuff. So it's really interesting. I mean, you can take a good photo in a game. It's not easy necessarily. There's definitely still artistry there. For sure, an uphill battle. I mean, in the same way that photographers try to prove that photography was an art in the 1940s and 50s, I think that video game photographers are probably trying to do now. But I've got much respect for anyone doing anything remotely unique, as anyone who's done any of these styles I've talked about today has done. So a couple final things. If you want to read more up about anything I've talked about today, I'll include a bunch of links in the description down below of all the articles and Wikipedias that I read. And also, huge thank you to Squarespace again for sponsoring today's video. Definitely check them out, link in the description. Anyway, I have to go. I got some bird aerial photography to do, obviously. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you eventually.